don't do that, that's something we've been doing for some time to help reduce the number of incidents that we go on. So once the 911 call is triaged and the call type is determined, that an ambulance responds, and there are 5 ambulances located within city limits. They're all paramedic level. One thing to note with our ambulance system is they're not specific to the city. These are operated by Buncombe County and also some county fire departments operate them, and also a third-party service. So these ambulances can respond into the city, or they may also respond out of the city. It's closest unit availability is how that works. And we operate, as y'all know, 12 firehouses. There's 16 fire companies within those 12 houses, 24 hours a day, and one 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day. And we then are dispatched if it's a top-tier emergency along with that ambulance, because we can respond so much quicker. Then we can begin to provide that life-saving interventions in a much quicker fashion than the ambulances can. So that obviously has a very positive benefit on patient outcomes, so that we're able to help our citizens quickly and take care of them as fast as we can. So our response, every firefighter in the city is trained as an emergency medical technician. That's about 200 hours worth of training that occurs as they come onto the fire department. We also have 3 specific companies which respond at the advanced EMT level, which is a higher level of service that can provide more advanced interventions to our patients, which include things such as they can push drugs for pain management, for cardiac events, and also for diabetic events, among others. And they're able to provide intravenous access, so they can start an IV to help them introduce those medications to the patients. And they also are able to do more advanced innovation techniques to those patients to make sure they have a packed airway. So that's who goes. Now, how do we determine what goes to what type of call? That's all predetermined. We have these predetermined response packages, and based on the tier or based on the information that the caller gives us, depends on how we dispatch a fire unit. So a fire unit equals 3 to 4 people. That's the minimum that we'll send on EMS event. Our most basic EMS event, which is our most common, is gets 1 fire company with those 3 to 4 folks on the apparatus. And that occurs 75% of the time or so. We also have, the next level will be to have up here is our high-risk medical or trauma incident. So this is an incident, a lot of times that may include violence. So like a shooting or a stabbing, an overdose, those sort of things. We up our response a little bit, still 1 fire company, but we also have a chief officer. They're there to help with the emergency scene management. They're able to call for more resources if we see the need for it. And also we have a safety officer, which helps to make sure that our folks are safe, and the scene is secure, and that they're out of harm's way, so that the firefighters can focus on that patient and provide the best level of service that we can do. A good example of this occurred unfortunately last week. We sent this response to the shooting that occurred in West Asheville. En route, our chief officer that was on the way realized that it was a greater event than just 1 patient, so he began to request further resources. So we were able to provide, I believe we had 15 firefighters on that scene, so that we were rapidly assess our patients, treat our patients, and get them to the hospital as quick as we can. That's how the system is designed to work well. Another significant event that we respond to are cardiac arrest. That is a person who is essentially dead. They have no pulse, they're not breathing. So what we have found in the best practice for these events, we used to send 1 fire company, and that was it to that call. Since 2014, we've increased the number of folks we send to that because we've changed the way we operate. Before we would get there, begin CPR, and then load and go as fast as we could to the hospital. What the medical community has determined is it's better off for the patient to provide consistent CPR compressions throughout the incident and stay on scene for 20 to 30 minutes, providing that consistent, not stopping at all, and then transport to the hospital if they're vital. This is a big plus for our firefighters to send more, because we're able to, as you can imagine, CPR is very taxing. We have to do about 120 compressions a minute. So we're trying to, we swap out. So somebody will do CPR for 1 to 2 minutes, one of our firefighters, and then trade out with another firefighter. And that way we can share that workload with everybody, keep that consistent, strong CPR there so that we increase our outcomes. We also send a the chiefs of those calls. The chief's job is obviously scene management, but also they play a huge role in the family liaison. So a lot of times this is a very traumatic event, as you can imagine, and that chief is there to help the family to connect them with resources post-incident so that we can help them deal with what they've gone through. So some of our numbers. Last year in 2017, approximately 10,000 events were EMS related. That's about half of our call volume. Like I said, that's a large number, but due to that emergency medical dispatch, that would be much higher if we responded to every EMS event that went on within the city. So that allows us to triage those calls and reduce that number. In 17, we had 93 cardiac arrests that we responded to. In Buncombe County, the overall discharge rate, which means walking out of the hospital, was 12%. That's a significant increase from 2014 when we began the new protocols for the CPR calls. We were at about 7 to 8% then, so we've increased that steadily. Each year it's increased that number. The discharge rate has been higher. That's overall for the county. We feel like locally in the city we're probably higher than that because of our response times and our ability to intervene much faster. And then another topic that's probably of interest is the number of Narcan administrations that we have given. In 2015, I think we had around 90 or so. In 2017, we're at 254, so you can see it's grown. These are for opioid overdoses, where we try to reverse that overdose. And so far this year, we have seen about 54 administrations of Narcan. So if that number was to hold true, we'd be a little less than 250, I think around 216, but as the summer comes on, those sort of things, we may see that. What we've seen is kind of a dip and then a rise in kind of a bell curve for that. And what's it cost? So each year we spend about $50,000 for this to provide all the EMS service that we do. One way that we're able to keep that number low is when we use equipment on the scene, we restock with the ambulance that's sent to us. So we restock off that ambulance, and then the ambulance restocks at the hospital, and that's where the cost is encountered, which is not billed. We don't pay for that. So the patient gets billed for that restocking. That's how that works. And with that, is there any questions?
So what happens if it's not life-threatening? Does just the EMS go?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So a lot of times you'll have like at a doctor's office, a lot of times just an ambulance will go to that doctor's office and we won't have to go to that sort of doctor.
And you said that the walking out rate was 12%. What is that average in the country?
It's between 8 and 10. So we are above the national average on that rate. Yes, ma'am. And we're working, one of our jobs, Chief Henry is over our EMS component, and he's working on better ability to track those statistics for us internally so we know exactly what AFD's discharge rate is. Mission keeps all that. We also, to add, we do a quality management program through Mission Hospital. So we actually meet with them monthly and review all significant incidents, and then we're able to determine if there's any improvements that can be made to the system based on that.
What's common feedback that you
For Mission, I think a good indicator is that we typically pilot a lot of the EMS changes because we're very dependable and we're able to, our firefighters have great skills, so they will ask us to pilot skills before that is pushed out, which is very helpful. Pit crew CPR is a good example of that. We were the first ones in the county to move to that to see if it's a viable, if it would be viable to use in the county. We were the first ones to employ that. In Narcan too, we're the first fire department to employ Narcan at the basic EMT level within the county.
Now I read something, and I just verified that this does or does not affect the fire department, Asheville Fire Department, that the commissioners are looking at licensing another ambulance company.
Right.
What is,
So we do not do any ambulance, we don't do any transports.
Right.
So the county has franchises that they can
okay.
issue to whoever they so please. And I think the one you're speaking of is Medic, who responds within the city. And I think they're talking about expanding that into the county.
I see.
So it's another service that's able to help us within the city.
But that isn't our decision.
No.
That isn't.
I mean, that's a county emergency services decision. One question we get a lot is why don't we take our big red fire trucks to EMS calls? We feel that quite often, and we studied that. We actually, for 20 years or so, operated with smaller vehicles in some of our firehouses, and what we found what we found is that we were spending $6,600 extra per year based on that program than if we were just using our fire trucks. We found our fire trucks, our maintenance is very much a function of time, not so much usage. So as the fire truck gets older, it costs more money to maintain, not necessarily because it's gone through an extra 100 calls this year. It's if we reduce that, it would not reduce it because we're having to buy the vehicle to begin with, the small vehicle, which, as y'all know, those prices keep going up, along with duplicate equipment, including the heart, the defibrillator, and all the equipment that goes along with that. And it also affects our reliability overall because then they're in a small vehicle, not in a fire truck. So if there's a fire call that comes in on the back end of the EMS call, we're not able to provide that service because we have to go travel back and forth.
The question came up last year.
Yeah, it's pretty common.
I think you do hear it.
And I understand it. I totally understand it. Intuitively, it seems like it would make more sense, but.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Okay, now we go to new business. We have a presentation on written consent, Ian Matt. Yeah, okay.
My name is Ian Vance. I'm a staff attorney at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice in Durham. I'm going to talk today about opportunities for reducing racial disparities in traffic stops by minimizing high discretion stops and searches. So I'm going to talk about two policy proposals that were brought to the City Council, I think a year ago this week, by the Asheville Buncombe NAACP branch who we've been working with. And those two recommendations are to first formally deprioritize or prohibit traffic stops for low-level regulatory and equipment violations. And the second is to require that written authorization be obtained for consent-based searches. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the statistics behind each of these recommendations and the experiences of other jurisdictions that have experimented with these policies. Just to kind of orient us, I thought I'd say a few words about Asheville's population. The most recent census estimates we get from the American Community Survey, which is a 5-year rolling average. It was last completed in 2016, put Asheville's white population at 68,001, which is that's the white non-Latino population, which is 77.7% of the population. Black population at 12.2% at 10,646. As a point of comparison, when we look at traffic stops, I went ahead and, for a lot of these slides, just kind of separated out traffic stops during the current chief's tenure, because there can be, just to make it kind of I have best to explain it, but policies can change from chief to chief, so I just thought we would compare from July 20th on. And curiously, during that time, whites have accounted for the exact same percentage of persons stopped in traffic stops as the local population, down to the 0.1%, 77.7%. By contrast, black drivers have accounted for 20.9% of those stops, which is 12.2% of the population. Consistently since 2002, which was the first year that data started being reported pursuant to state law, We have seen black drivers overrepresented in the stopped population, and in recent years, these disparities have grown. Last year in 2017, Asheville PD posted its most racially disparate stop and search numbers in the 16 years that data is available. And the drivers last year were 70% white, 24% black, 4% Hispanic. And searches last year were for the first time majority minority. So 49% of those searched were white, 46% of those searched were black, and 4% Hispanic. And then there's this just another kind of interesting fact. The department reported stopping more than 50% more black drivers in 2017 than they did in 2016, which is compared to just 0.1% more white drivers. So 6 more white drivers, but about 500 more black drivers than the previous year. Just to kind of orient Asheville in North Carolina, this is a slide I pulled, or a graphic I pulled from a forthcoming book by Dr. Frank Baumgartner, who's a political scientist at University of Chapel Hill, who's kind of pioneered research into traffic stops. And he's got this book coming out this summer, some of the contents of which you can find online. And what he's done here is mapped the population, the white population, the black population against their share of stops all across North Carolina. So this represents 20 million stops. And the line you see represents kind of where you would expect all those dots to fall if people were stopped at a rate consistent with their rate in the population. And as you can see, that pretty much everywhere you look, with some exception, whites are underrepresented in the stop population, and blacks are overrepresented relative to local populations. However, there are variations in terms of the racial disparities when you break it down by stop type. So we see that public safety related stops, which are the type of stops, it includes speeding, stoplight violations, stop sign violations, DWI, the things where there's more objective evidence of dangerous driving that can endanger someone. These are less racially disparate. So just looking at all of Asheville's data ever, dating back to 2002, 86% of those stops are white compared to 13.8% black, so much more in line with the local population. But when you look at the high discretion, non-safety related stops, which are the crooked license plates, the tail lights, the things that indicate that your car is maybe out of compliance, these are much more racially disparate. So same period of time, we see those stops are 73% white and over a quarter black, and 28% when you look at since 2015. Also, if you look at the high discretion stops as a percentage of black stops and white stops, you see that 37% of black drivers stopped last year were stopped for one of these reasons, as compared to 25% white drivers. This is an excerpt from a letter or a memorandum from the School of Government that was circulating last week, that they noted that both within North Carolina and nationwide, there have been police departments that are concerned about these disparities, that have chosen to discontinue or reduce these types of stops, and that data pre and post these policy changes have generally showed reductions in the racial stop disparities. And they cite an article about Greensboro, and also an NPR story that I think gets into the experiences of some police departments in Connecticut that have done this. This is the Greensboro article. This ran a couple years ago. The main finding, or main takeaway from this piece, was that in Greensboro, most of the black drivers were stopped for regulatory or equipment violations, which are the infractions, of course, that officers have discretion to ignore. And as I said when I presented last year, the Greensboro police, as in response to this article, did temporarily halt these stops. So we had a year of data where they weren't making these stops, or they sort of formally minimized them. And we saw in that 1 year time a 10% reduction in the black to white stop disparity. Unfortunately, they did rescind that policy, and those disparities immediately rebounded and are back to being worse than ever. But we are able to project the impact if APD were to adopt a similar policy by going back and looking at past data, kind of removing those stops and seeing how it changes the racial character of people stopped overall. You can see the statistics safety issues would shrink the racial disparities by about a third. And it's worth noting that in North Carolina we do have mandatory car inspections annually, so it's not. Some states like South Carolina you don't, so there's not as many mechanisms to intervene and catch people whose cars are out of compliance. Here we actually do have that. So arguably less need for these types of stops in North Carolina. Oops, I think I'm going. There we go. Okay. Fayetteville, as I said, or I might not have mentioned yet, Fayetteville experimented with both a regulatory stops ban and written consent starting in 2013 when Chief Medlock took over. And what we saw during his tenure was a shift away from regulatory stops and towards public safety stops. So the regulatory stops went from about half of all the department's traffic stops in 2013 to just about 16.5 in 2015. And during that time, we saw a reduction in the racial disparities, but also we saw an increase in public safety outcomes. So a measurable reduction in the number of severe crashes that resulted in injuries and fatalities. I think Fayetteville, the other thing they saw was improved community police relations. You see Chief Medlock is pictured there with former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, who came and to kind of shine a light on the good work that he had done in Fayetteville in turning that department around and really making a change in police community relations. You can see a quote there from Jimmy Buxton, who's the local NAACP branch president, who was once very, very critical of the Fayetteville PD, saying that he was very pleased with the work that Medlock has done. We feel that he's made great strides in community relations. Police complaints received by the NAACP were greatly reduced since he became the chief. Another minister there said Chief Medlock has been a godsend to Fayetteville. There was a lot of distrust between African Americans and the police, and that has turned around. Another reason that Chief Medlock did this was he didn't want one of these stops to unnecessarily become the next Philando Castile and Sandra Bland. These are, of course, everyone is familiar with these incidents. And you can see Jack McDevitt, who's the director of the Institute of Race and Justice at Northeastern, saying that these are the types of stops, more than any other type of stops, where people's frustration level is highest. And, they think, here we go again, I'm being pulled over for some foolish thing, so they can try to see if there's some other violation they can get me on. And in my experience representing people pulled over in traffic stops, these do tend to be the ones that most quickly get out of control because people experience them as unfair, and they're the type of stops where people are most likely to challenge the officer and get into an argument, and that's not good for anyone. Moving on to searches, I want to start by comparing traffic stop search rates nationally in North Carolina and locally. So got a couple different numbers here. The first is the best estimate we have on the overall search rate nationwide throughout the United States. About 3.5% of traffic stops lead to some sort of search, and that's based on a U.S. Department of Justice survey that was done in 2011. In North Carolina, that number looks to be slightly lower, 2.4%. I've seen it at 3% as well, kind of depending on how you calculate it. But compared to Asheville, you can see Asheville is much higher. All-time Asheville search rate since 2002 is 7.6% of traffic people stopped being searched. Of North Carolina's dozen largest cities, Asheville last year posted the highest black search rate and the second highest overall search rate. So you can see the cities there ranked from largest to smallest, the top 12 cities. Asheville's the only city of the top dozen with a double-digit search rate for black drivers. This next graphic shows consent searches as a percent of overall searches. So what percentage of the searches that are occurring are police relying upon the person's grant of consent or purported grant of consent? And you can see in Asheville, that number over the last decade, is 53.3%. Greenville is the only department that's higher, but Greenville conducts about a third as many searches as Asheville does over that time. Less than a third of these consent searches in Asheville ever recover contraband. So as as we can see, the data reflects significant racial disparities in the way that consent searches are administered. Since data has been collected, 6.5% of black drivers and 3.4% of white drivers, actually I should say black motorists and white motorists, because there are some passengers mixed in here as well, stopped, have been subjected to a purported consent-based search, which translates to about a 91% greater likelihood of being subjected to a consent search if you're black and stopped in a traffic stop. But consent searches have actually recovered contraband more often on whites than blacks in traffic stops by about a 5% difference. I met with Chief Hooper last week and kind of talked about written consent. One of the things she said that she wanted to know is, is this considered a best practice? And she wasn't sure that it was. And I'm going to get to that in a moment, but I think it's worth noting that multiple states and jurisdictions have long regulated consent searches. Some have banned consent searches outright for a long time, and some have required written consent. New Jersey police adopted a written consent search policy in 1975 when the New Jersey Supreme Court issued this decision, State versus Johnson, which I think is, makes an important point. They said that where the state seeks to justify a search on the basis of consent, it has the burden of showing that the consent is voluntary, an essential element of which is knowledge of the right to refuse consent. That last turn of phrase is what differentiates New Jersey's law from North Carolina's law and U.S. Supreme Court law. New Jersey has explicitly held that you can't waive or you can't grant consent unless you know you have the right to say no. In New Jersey, the court went on to say many persons, perhaps most, would view the request of a police officer to make a search as having the force of law, unless it is shown by the state that the person involved knew that he had the right to refuse to accede to such a request, as assenting to the search is not meaningful. One can't be held to have waived a right if he's unaware of its existence. Of course, in North Carolina, as I've already said, multiple cities do this. Fayetteville passed the policy in 2012, Durham in 2014, Chapelville in 2015. In addition to that, California, Hawaii, Minnesota, and Rhode Island state police are prohibited from conducting suspicionless consent searches during traffic stops, either as a result of a court opinion or a consent decree as a result of a lawsuit. Sheriff Duncan was recently in the news last week talking about this proposal, and he said, don't do this. It sounds reasonable when you're right in the middle of an opioid crisis and you call the sheriff's office or the police department and say, I have someone beside me that's selling heroin out of this house. Vehicle stops and consent searches are two of the major tools we have to combat this. This is from an article by Professor Devin Carbato, who is a Fourth Amendment expert at UCLA. This is a really interesting article that I would encourage people to read. That he responds kind of directly to the sort of argument that Sheriff Duncan was making. He says that linking the legitimacy of consent searches to the fact that police officers often will not have the requisite justification to intrude upon a person's privacy turns Fourth Amendment protections upside down is precisely because consent searches don't require prior justification that they ought to be suspect. Police officers don't have an undifferentiated right or absolute right to incriminating evidence. Put differently, they may not intrude upon our privacy and liberty interests by any means necessary. This upside-down conception of the Fourth Amendment has profound racial implications, given existing stereotypes about crime and criminality. He goes on to say that in the context of a police encounter with a black person, the burden of presumed criminality, a significant part of the burden of blackness, will not be easy to disprove. The tension between stereotypes about blackness on the one hand and the perception of innocence necessary to avoid or terminate police encounters on the other creates a racial incentive system for blacks to signal non-criminality. That is, that in the context of a police encounter, a black person will need to find ways to demonstrate to the police officer that stereotypes about blackness are wrong. With respect to consent searches specifically, one way for a black person to present counter-stereotypical information in response to this system is to say yes to a request to search. Because of these stereotypes, there's greater pressure for blacks to say yes to consent searches than there is for whites. Consenting to a search may be the only way a black person can demonstrate his innocence. Thus, and I think this is an important point, if you want to have a racially equitable policy, assuming that consent searches are a means by which a person can establish his innocence, the extent to which one perceives the need to do this, that is, to give up privacy to prove innocence, is a function of race. This is another quote from a dissenting opinion in the Minnesota Supreme Court, Justice Page. He says, this was a case involving a consent search that was upheld, and Justice Page dissented. He said, I speak from the perspective of an African-American male who was taught by his parents that for personal safety, when in an unplanned encounter with law enforcement officers, it is best to comply carefully and without question to the officer's request. It's a lesson that I've taught my children. In fact, is one that I follow to this day. And finally, this professor in Journal of Criminology and Law says that given the reality faced by the African American community, a court's nimble assertion that a person can just say no to a police request to search is a sorry, empty slogan. The reality facing African Americans and other members of minority groups is this: they are more likely to be stopped, more likely to be asked to consent to a search, and because of their experiences in the community, they will frequently, if not usually, feel coerced to forego their constitutional right to privacy. The idea of a voluntary consent in that circumstance is fantasy. So the idea behind a written consent policy is that it can help neutralize this coercive effect by providing assurance to the person that if they should decide not to grant consent, that decision will be respected. And with written consent, when consent is given, which it is, some people do consent, courts have greater assurance that it was truly voluntary. There's actually been studies into sort of what they call the psychology of coercion in consent searches. There was a study in Ohio of a random sampling of 54 persons who were verbally asked to consent to search, and it found the following: that the overwhelming majority, 49 of the 54, agreed to let the police search, just 5 refused. And of the 49 who granted consent, all but 2 said that they were afraid of what would happen to them if they didn't consent. Their fears included having their trip delayed, being searched anyway, incurring property damage, being arrested, being beaten, or being killed. Only 1 out of the 49 said they believed police would honor their request, or their refusal rather, to grant consent to search. And 74% of them, this is another important piece, said they had very negative feelings about the experience of being consent searched, and said that it had a lasting impact on them and had diminished their respect for the police. There's another study in Maryland of traffic stops found that 96% of people who were verbally asked for consent gave their permission, or were reported to give their permission. Another source put it at 98%. And then going back to that 2011 Justice Department survey, they found, this wasn't specifically about asking the same question, but they found that almost 40% of people who were searched felt that the police had behaved improperly, and that was something that stuck with them. Importantly, I've been to Asheville a number of times and heard reference made to the President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. I've heard Chief Hooper talk about it as an important document. Written consent is part of this. It is actually it's part of Pillar 1, building trust and legitimacy. You can see it there, recommendation 2.10. Law enforcement officers should be required to seek consent before a search and explain that a person has the right to refuse when there is no warrant or probable cause. Officers should ideally obtain written acknowledgement that they've sought consent to search in specific circumstances. So, in sum, reasons why a mandatory written consent search policy makes sense for Asheville. We know that APD searches black motorists pursuant to reported grants of consent at nearly twice the rate as whites, and it also has the highest overall black search rate in North Carolina for a city of its size or larger. Its consent searches of black motorists are less productive than its searches of white motorists. I know that there's concern about gun crime, and are we going to be tying the hands of our police? No. The data indicates that only 3 times during the present chief's tenure has a consent search during a traffic stop uncovered a weapon of any kind and led to an arrest. I don't know the types of weapons because those aren't tracked. By and large, what is found are knives. And I think it's really important to note, Michigan versus Long, Supreme Court has said that if police have reason to believe a driver may be armed, they already are permitted to conduct a limited search of a vehicle and a person, to a pat-down search, even absent probable cause or consent to search. So even if you implement this policy, if police have reason to believe there's a gun in the car, they're going to be able to conduct a search. Another reason over the last decade, APD has relied more heavily on motorist consent to conduct searches than any other department. I've had police chiefs tell me before that if the majority of your searches are consent searches, then you've got a problem. It indicates officers going on fishing expeditions, or it can indicate that. Finally, because of differences in how blacks and whites are socialized to deal with the police, black drivers experience greater social pressure to accede to request a search, and a written consent to search policy is more racially equitable for this reason. So what are the benefits of a written consent to search policy if you choose to pass one? Well, one, you have a more racially equitable policy. This policy helps normalize the experience among drivers of different races and provides a safeguard against discriminatory search practices. So if you do have officers out there that are searching people because they're motivated by racial animus, this can help thwart that effort on their part. You also reduce searches of innocent drivers. We compare the pre- and post-written consent data in Durham and Fayetteville. We see that there's a significant reduction in the number of innocent drivers, particularly innocent black drivers, that are subjected to warrantless roadside searches. So a big drop in the number of people who aren't found with anything who are being subjected to searches. It's a safeguard against coercion. You advise people of their right to refuse, and you require written authorization. This policy helps ensure that people understand their rights and assures them that the rights will be respected if they exercise them. As I said, you have improved community relations. If you just look at some of the headlines in Durham, 2012, 2013, Fayetteville that same time versus today. It's a big change in the way that reporters write about the state of police-community relations, and they often will cite the written consent policy as one of the turning points. And then finally, it doesn't limit APD's ability to make seizures. Again, they can still do the searches under Michigan versus Long if they believe there's a gun in the car. We also know from Durham implemented written consent in October of 2014. They made 84 more seizures in 2015 than they did in 2013 after the written consent policy. So it had the effect of sort of focusing officers' efforts in this way, that they actually did a better job of making seizures from traffic stops. Finally, I wanted to close with this quote from Justice Sotomayor. This was a case that kind of made some headlines a couple years ago. Her dissenting opinions, case Utah versus Shreve. She argued that the Supreme Court stop and search doctrine has given officers far too much discretion, and that we now have a system of traffic enforcement in this country that is unjust and racially discriminatory. This is a U.S. Supreme Court justice saying this. She's essentially saying that the Supreme Court has abdicated its responsibility to drivers to set reasonable parameters on what law enforcement can do. And this opinion, which I'd encourage you to read, reads like a parade of horribles. It kind of collects all the different things police are allowed to do in the context of a traffic stop into one opinion. And I think that the lesson of this opinion is that it's really incumbent upon local governments, local police departments, municipalities, to set some reasonable parameters, because the Supreme Court has not. She said in this opinion, this case involves a suspicionless stop, one in which the officer initiated a chain of events without justification. She says many innocent people are subjected to the humiliations of unconstitutional searches, but it is no secret that people of color are disproportionate victims of this type of scrutiny. And by legitimizing the conduct that produces this double consciousness, this case tells everyone, white and black, guilty and innocent, that your body is subject to invasion, while courts excuse the violation of your rights. We must not pretend that the countless people who are routinely targeted by police are isolated. They are the ones who recognize that unlawful police stops corrode all our civil liberties and threaten all our lives. And until their voices matter too, our justice system will continue to be anything but. So, I'd be happy to take any questions.
I don't think I have a lot of questions. I recall hearing a lot of this a year ago. I also recall us being very disappointed or angered by the results that we saw. But I think that we failed to act a year ago. I hope that the same thing doesn't happen this time. But at this time, I would like to ask anyone wanting to make public comment, if anyone wants to make public comment on this topic, to come forward and do so now.
Okay. So here, first of all, because I believe these statistics are abhorrent, and I believe that we as a city talk about equity, and we need to put some action behind that. And this is one of the clear ways that we can put some action behind equity. I believe that you all are committed to equity. You've talked to me personally about that, and so this is a really firm opportunity in a place where we clearly have racial disparities and extreme racial disparities to act around written consent. And I just think the clarity behind it is really powerful. And I must say that implicit bias comes into play with this. And for me in particular, when we have officer discretion, which we often have thought of as a good thing, what we're finding is that is where the door opens for implicit bias. So if I'm operating under implicit bias, which most of us are, then when I have discretion, that tends to rise to the surface, and I think that explains a lot of the disparities that we're seeing in these traffic stops. I also want to connect this because this is part of our 6-point policy platform of Beloved Asheville's Homeless Voice Group that we presented to you. And the reason that written consent was a part of our platform was that what we heard time and time again were stories. We don't have data on this because it's not being collected, but we think this is the equivalent to the traffic stops for homeless folks as pedestrian stops and searches of backpacks. And again, we heard multiple stories where people were told, let us search your backpack or we're taking you to jail, which is not consent, but that's where it was falling under, and that's a very coercive thing. And I think similarly, people who are homeless feel like also that they have to prove something, that if they're instructed by a law enforcement officer to do something, that they have to do that. And I think written search just makes it crystal clear where people's rights are. And I think if we want to uphold the rights of people, and I love this opinion by the justice, if we want to uphold people's rights to their personhood and to their privacy, we certainly want to do this. And I think written consent puts the power in everybody's hands, just to make it clear what we're doing and why, and that folks have the right to refuse. And I think that is the kind of trust-building exercise that we need right now, particularly from law enforcement. And I've heard time and time again that Asheville Police Department wants to build trust with the community, and I think this would go a long way, is just being really clear about folks' rights to refuse to be searched. Thank you.
Point of order for the chairman. This is a public comment on this specific issue, and I can give public comments at the end of the meeting on a different topic, correct?
Yeah.
During open public comment
Yeah.
at the end of the meeting. So I want to thank Mr. Mance for having to come up the mountain, like half a dozen times now, Ian? Y'all, being in this meeting feels like deja vu all over again. It was literally a year to the day that we were up at full council having this same exact conversation with the same exact presentation when you were on that council. Some of the members of council weren't. Thank God we're seeing some progress now. But the fact of the matter is that I even watched Keith Young plead to have the issue come back before full council. And I watched the mayor punt it to city staff for some report and review. It got buried in some nebulous glacial governmental process. A year went by, and now we're back at a committee having this same conversation when it's already been to council once. When a sitting councilman told Gary Jackson, yo, get us a report, bring it back so we can vote up or down on whether or not we want to implement these reforms. I watched it happen. All of these activists in this audience watched it happen. We watched you kick the can, drag your feet, and you know what's happened in the meantime? Just like Amy's talking about, this is a conversation about traffic stops. We don't even know what the data looks like on pedestrian stops. And that's how Mr. Rush, on his way home from a 13-hour shift, got laid wide open in the middle of the street and got choked, beaten, tased almost to death. Y'all could have done something. Could have done something a year ago. You could have sat, had an honest debate about whether or not these reforms were worthy enough, and then you could have done what city councils do. You could have had an up or down vote on it, and you could have shown your true stripes, and you could have shown this whole community where you stand on this issue. But instead, you let it go back to these suits over here at City Hall, where it went round and round and round and round and round and round and round, and here we are. Same problems. Actually, they're worse now. Get your acts together.
I do want to encourage you that we need these traffic stop recommendations accepted, but other people can speak more about that. I want to piggyback on what Amy said as far as the consent searches also affecting homeless people and formerly homeless people and people who look like they might be homeless. And I was very intrigued by what he said about psychology of coercion. So I want you to think for a bit about the psychology of violation. It's one thing to have an officer ask to search your bag if the only thing in that bag is an umbrella and your water bottle and your phone and the materials you need for today's meetings. If everything that really matters to you is safe at home. If you haven't got a home, if that backpack includes everything you need for survival on a day-to-day and long-term basis, everything that remains of your old life, everything of sentimental value to you, your clean underwear, your medications, your therapy paperwork, who knows what else, everything that matters to you, and to know that you can be stopped at any time and have your entire intimate life thrown out and searched for no good reason, simply because some officer has a hair up their butt. People should not have to live like that.
Hi, my name is Patrick Conan, and I wanted to issue both my personal support and thanks to Ian Mance for this proposal. And I'd also like to highlight that Code for Asheville's petition for police accountability through data transparency highlights this issue and this set of proposals as one of the items we would like council to consider. And our petition has over 800 signatures and 20 organizational endorsements now. So I think that indicates a wide level of support throughout the community to take up issues like this again. And more importantly, to start a process where proposals like this one from the NAACP and Southern Coalition, but also a whole lot of other proposals, a whole lot of discussions that we need to have can take place. And I think this committee is doing a good job now of hearing these proposals and moving them on. But I think there's a lot of work to be done on traffic stops. I think there's a lot of ways that we can involve the community in the process of talking about our police department. And if we don't do that, we're going to keep on seeing the same incidents year after year. I think Ian said a lot of examples where other departments have pushed the envelope a little more, have looked at some ideas, tried out some ideas, and they've seen results for it. And I think it's time that Asheville should start to do the same. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. We'll go to a discussion, Asheville Fire Department post-retirement benefits. Mike Marshall.
My name is Mike Marshall, President of Asheville Firefighters Association. Thank you for having us here today. Our discussion today is about cancer in the Asheville Fire Department, the fire service in general. What we've learned, what we've come to find out with a lot of research is that 61% of the firefighters from 2002 to 2016 died in line 2016, 70% died in the line of duty from cancer. The issue with that is in the state of North Carolina, cancer is not considered line of duty. We don't have cancer presumption laws in the state of North Carolina. We're one of 13 states that don't recognize that. So the issue we have with that is that in July of 2012, a policy change was made within the city of Asheville to remove health benefits from retirees. Now, what we know about cancer now, coupled with PTSD, which we're learning more and more about as well, this is a very serious issue. We had 4 people in our department alone last year, active firefighters. 2 had to retire, 1 still in treatment, and 1 died. Got a 34-year-old man died. And it's time that we start thinking about what's apples to apples in this city. Apples to apples is not comparing us, and no disrespect to any other department in the city, but you can't compare us to HR, Parks and Rec, Street Department, anybody else, because they're not in contact with the things that we are, that we know about now. Carcinogens are rampant. And these guys they're facing carcinogens every day. And we know more and more about not just inhalation that's causing the cancer, but absorption. The neck, the groin, the armpits, those are the major areas that the absorption is coming from. I gave all of you information, I don't know if you have it with you or not, but also in that packet there's, from what we can document from 1990, we have over 65 firefighters that have contracted cancer. Most of those have passed away, there are still some alive. It's time to think about the major question we have here today, or what we're asking for, is a policy change. We want a policy change to bring those health benefits back to our retirees. Anybody that's hired from 2012 forward. You can't look at these numbers. You can't look at the numbers. You can't look at the personal issues that you have in these packets and not think about, the firefighters can't be compared to anybody else in the city. What we're faced with every day. Even sleep deprivation is part of this, which also causes and actually feeds cancer, tumor cells. We're learning more about that as well. It's known as stressful sleep. Our guys may be in bed, but it's not a restful sleep, it's stressful sleep. It disrupts the circadian rhythm, and it actually feeds cancer tumors. So we're learning more and more about this, and this is a huge thing, I'm telling you. Our guys are out here doing a job for 30 years. What they're faced with, what they're in contact with, not just that, but the stress levels, PTSD, heart disease. You can't expect these folks to do 30 years of this job, giving you everything they got, putting their life on the line, and then tell them, sorry, we're not going to protect you till you can get the Medicare. After 30 years in this job, there's going to be a lot of, not just cancer, we know about that now, but also bad shoulders, bad knees, bad backs, hips. I mean, it goes on and on and on. These guys are wearing 70 pounds a year every time they get off a fire truck. They do it every day they work. So there's going to be a lot of injuries. They're at a time of their life, and what you're also facing, if you can't get this back for these people, this policy changed, they're going to have to work more. They're going to have to work longer in their career. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know, I'm sure there are some people. I don't know many people that can do this job at 60 years old. I just don't know many. It's a tough job. It's a very physical, very physically demanding job. There's probably guys that can do it that shouldn't be. They just should not be. I want also, at this time, I would like to bring up one of the people that's actually going to be involved in this, Austin, if you'd come forward, please. This is one of the firefighters hired after 2012. I want you to hear his side of the story as well. But thank you for your consideration, and this has got to be done. This has to be done.
Good afternoon. My name's Austin Hall. I'm a firefighter on Rescue Company 3 in West Asheville. Been on the job about 4.5 years, and I'm one of about approximately 109 guys, men and women, who the policy change to take away health benefits when we retire affects. And I'm just here to specifically ask that we reverse this policy decision. We're extremely proud of what we do. We're extremely proud of the service that we provide to the city. Being a firefighter requires an all-in mentality. We are asked to possibly give up our lives in the service of the city and its community. And to enable us to have that all-in attitude, we need to know that when our time of service is over, that we're going to be taken care of. We have a risky job, notwithstanding the incredible cancer risks that we face due to the types of materials that burn in houses now, the types of materials that burn in cars that we face daily. But our job is risky physically. It's a rough and tumble job. We're proud to do it. We get up every day. We're excited to be on fire trucks. But we need to know at the end of the line that we're going to have affordable, comprehensive health care coverage to get us to Medicare, to get us to that age where we don't have to worry about it anymore. It's important, and we want to protect and serve this community, and we want to know that at the end of our service that the city is willing to take care of us. Thank you.
I need to back up. I think I didn't follow the procedure properly, but should we not have made recommendations following Mr. Nance's?
Yes, I made a note that you did not make vote or make a recommendation
Okay.
after the written
Well,
request.
I would like to recommend that this go to full council, after Mr. Nance would like to come back and speak to council. That would be good, but I would like it to come to us with where we're able to vote that night. To not kick this ball down the road again, as we did last time. You know exactly that.
I would say just not in the two. Okay, we'll move it forward to city council.
And as far as what we just heard, I don't know exactly how this moves forward.
So my recommendation would be, so in order to do this, there is a significant financial impact on the city. So my recommendation, if this committee wanted to move it forward, the correct process would be to move it to the finance committee, so that you can hear both the legal aspects of whether or not it can be applied to just one department or one group, and not to all city employees, and what that cost would be. So my recommendation would be moving it forward to the finance committee to address both of those issues, and then based on their actions, then move forward to full council.
As a citizen, can I speak?
Yes.
So my name is Tom Tesser. I live downtown, and I am very passionate about the fire department. I lived in New Jersey before this, and I was also passionate about the fire department that served the town that I grew up in, Verona, and very active as a citizen advocate for that town. And I feel very strongly about Asheville as well. And so much so that my wife and I, Joyce, reached into our pockets and took out thousands of dollars to put together a festival yesterday to bring this whole element and whole idea to the consciousness of the city, so that funds could be raised privately, so that these guys who risk their lives when we call, they come, so that they don't have to put their lives unnecessarily, needlessly at risk. It's one thing for us to say, great, they get paid what they get paid, and if they have health care, whether they have it or not, too bad. But I think it's abhorrent. I listen to what an equitable way of treating the population here by police stops between black and white and Hispanic. I think it's very fair and equitable. I think that kicking the can down the road to a finance committee, when these guys serve all of us when we're in trouble, they'll go up to a burning building to pull our butts out of that building, and we have to kick this down to a finance committee. I think that that's abhorrent. And to me, I can't believe that I'm hearing this, and that we're asking these guys to put their lives on the line. We're asking them to come out and support us and save us when our lives are in danger, and that you can't have a yes/no vote on this situation, just like you're going to have on the traffic and police stops before. The difference is that these folks are going to come out and save your butt and your life. And they do it willingly, and they do it without question. So for us to sit here and talk about going to a finance committee, we should be treating these people as gods, because one day they may actually save your life.
I don't know how to reply there other than, I mean,
Well-
we're well into budget discussions and
Yeah, I mean,
we'd
the
love
only,
to be part of it.
the intent certainly isn't to kick the can down the road. The intent is to understand what the financial implications are associated with it. So I hope that it's not being viewed as kicking the can down the road. I think that it is something, for consideration in order to understand the full context of what it would mean and what that decision would be. It would be to understand that through how it impacts the city's budget.
But I would say to that, this is nothing we have to create and birth. It was in place before 2011. And I think that will come with a lot of financial data. And just to make the proper adjustments, and I think our financial committee is probably well able to do that, comparing the size of the force at that time and to where we are now. I don't think it takes that much time. So I would recommend that it go straight to council instead of going to the finance committee. I think we're savvy enough to make a report and it not have to go through a long, drawn-out process.
That would be amazing.
Would it also need to be part of tomorrow's budget discussion as well, or?
We would not be able to make it happen later tomorrow for the budget work session. So, staff would put together, we would make a recommendation on the budget, and then council would either decide they want to take it up as part of this year's budget, which would mean coming up with additional funds or cutting to offset that to make it happen. If you wanted to make it effective this year. If not, then it could be in line for consideration for next year's budget.
Can we at least get the numbers that, the numbers from before? That would be a great starting point.
Yeah.
I think we have another person who wants to comment.
I'd like to add another line.
My name's Rob Singleton. I'm retired from the fire department. I retired as a captain in 2011 due to health issues. And all my names on the list. I have leukemia. And if I did not have insurance when I had to retire, I probably would not be standing here talking to you. That's how important the issue is. Because you've already got cancer and you're out of the system, how are you going to get insurance? How are you going to pay for your health care coverage? And my cancer is one of the ones that's on this list. And this is a big issue for these younger guys coming up. And it's not going to cost that much now. In 25 years from now, you might see some cost. But now, you're not, because they're not going to be eligible to retire for 24, 25 more years. That's when they're going to need the insurance. And that's when it's going to affect. So it's not an issue that's going to cost money now. We're talking way down the road. Retiree insurance and keeping that benefit, and it is very important. Thank you.
dig in, Reverend Amy Cantrell. I was thinking this meeting really is about what's happening in our nation right now, and I'm really speaking as a faith leader right now because I'm speaking about what's morally right. We're talking about systemic racism. We're talking about the need for health care for all. This meeting has broken my heart hearing this, hearing how we treat our people. This is about how we treat our people. So I'm coming to speak for all of that because all of that connects with what I want to talk about, which is public safety. Because I want to talk about sanctuary. I want to talk about the nightmare of the week that I've spent, and I have privilege. I have the privilege of my skin color. I have the privilege economically. I have privilege to speak to you. I have the privilege of papers, none of which I asked for, none of which I earned, all of which I just have. And I want to talk about public safety. I want to talk about neighborhoods that have been terrorized over this week. Children who are afraid and who are being taunted in our schools. I want to talk about how an agency came into this jurisdiction, the jurisdiction that you all have, and perpetrated kidnapping in front of children in a grocery store parking lot. Kidnapping somebody's father and taking him God only knows where. And the trauma that has caused. I have never witnessed such palpable evil. I've seen these folks go into neighborhoods and sit in neighborhoods and sit in grocery store parking lots. I witnessed this with my eyes. And then trying to feed thousands of families, which we have, who are too afraid to come out of their homes in our city. Too afraid. So they starved for a week. They kept their children inside for a week. They didn't go to work and lost all of those funds for a week, rippling out now to pay rent and food and all that they'll have to pay this coming month. These are the people that are working in our city, that wash dishes here and clean hotel rooms and build buildings and work, doing the things that take care of a lot of us. And it felt that we turned our backs on them. And we let violence be perpetrated against them. And so I'm asking, what is right? What is right? We will find the funds to do what is right by some of the people in this room, I hope. We will put policies into place to do what is right for the people of our city. We will take action for what is right. And I'm asking, what will you take risk for what is right? There was a pastor in Germany that said something famous. They came for this group. They came for the other group. I didn't stand up. Then they came for me. When will we stand up and make decisions based on what is right? I can't tell you what is legal. I can only tell you what is right. And will we risk? Some of the most important moral leaders of our day and days past that we teach our children. We have thousands of people, and I've seen you all walk in honor of Dr. King. And he didn't do always what was legal, but he did what was right. And there are many others. And this is our time where we must decide between what is legal and what is right. I don't want to have to look another family in the eye and say we didn't do what was right. We turned our backs and a deaf ear, and we pretended not to see. Because people will look back on us and on these days and ask us, what did we do to protect people, protect children, to protect families. And so I earnestly urge you to do everything in your power and to take risks for what is right. And declare sanctuary now.
Emotional meeting. Like I mentioned earlier, I've watched the city drag its feet to make change. I've watched the city do some seriously shady stuff just to maintain the status quo. In fact, I once witnessed Assistant City Attorney John Maddock defend the behavior of CPAC Chair Larry Holt when he violated all the rules of that committee and the rules found in the city's own board and commissions manual by disinviting Chief Hooper from her required participation, claiming that the same city manual, a manual that Ms. Matthews spent a whole hour at CPAC presenting to the entire committee, was invalid because it was a draft version. I've watched goalposts be moved. I've watched new policies just be invented out of thin air. These recent shenanigans around this committee, though, take the cake. They take the cake. At the last one of these PSC meetings, I watched with my own 2 eyes after Code for Asheville presented a petition about progressive, no-cost reforms on how to get data transparency from APD, stuff that's done all over the entire country. I watched this committee put a motion forward to say, Mr. Conant, you can present at full council tomorrow. And in addition, a directive was given to city staff to generate reports around the feasibility of instituting these progressive, no-cost, very simple reforms. Okay? A motion by an elected body directed towards the technocrats at City Hall to do a certain thing. Okay? Now, the IT department, they got cracking on that. They generated their report. It's ready. We have a copy of it. But APD, they were like, hell no, we ain't doing that. We're not going to do that at all. Ms. Ball, am I correct in saying that the report that was directed to be created is not going to be ready for tomorrow's full council meeting? Is that correct? That's correct. Can you speak up?
That's correct.
Jonathan, you're not supposed to do it.
That is an example of a slow motion coup, ladies and gentlemen. When you have people that you elected to office who give a directive to these paid suits at City Hall. What do you guys make 6 figures a year for if you can't do the work that you've been asked to do by an elected committee? The simple fact of the matter is that from what I know, it was Ms. Smith and Mr. Haynes who put forward and seconded that motion. Brian had 11,000 people vote for him in this city. Ms. Smith had 9,000 people vote for him. That's silencing 20,000 of the people in this community who put these people on this committee. And Ms. Whistler, you knew I'd get around to you. You went out behind the chairman's back, sent an email out to people claiming that reports aren't generated unless the entirety of full council directs city staff to do that. That's patently absurd. You know that. Anyone who knows how local government functions knows that's patently absurd. You asked city staff to create a report tonight, didn't you? Around the feasibility of this fireman's benefits. Committees generate reports. You lied. You lied to members of the public, and you covered for city staff's recalcitrance. This is unacceptable. It's a breakdown in our basic democracy. We voted y'all in. You do things. You tell these folks to do things, and they do them. Your job is to ask how high when council asks you to jump. Gary Jackson's gone. We got rid of that SOB. It should be a new day in Asheville. Turn the page, y'all. Turn the page. Someone else?
My name is Patrick Conan. I want to thank this committee for advancing Mr. Vance's proposal again. And I do want to comment briefly on staff reports on the importance of prioritizing these discussions, because I understand that, sometimes it takes additional time to complete reports. At the same time, I can understand the frustration that many in our community feel when these delays happen time and again, and it just seems like it's so difficult, especially for a proposal from the community, to make progress in this city. So I would just ask, I think on the issue of the presentation I'm making tomorrow, I was really hopeful that all the reports would be there so council could take action. That being said, I've been communicating with city staff and with council, and hopefully we're minimizing those delays as much as possible, which I greatly appreciate. But I think we need to do the same thing with Mr. Vance's report. And I want to point out that staff, both legal and APD, have commented on deprioritizing regulatory stops and written consent. It's not something that I think should take a long time. I think with both of these proposals, ultimately we're getting to the point that it's on council to make a decision one way or another. And I appreciate the efforts this committee's making, and I just think we need to make this the standard instead of the exception to move things from this committee quickly to council and get a decision made. So that members of the community know where we stand. Either we're gonna do written consent or we're not. But it's been a year, we haven't known whether it's something the council is on board with or something that we're just spinning our wheels about. I think we're making progress, we're getting there. I just encourage this committee to continue that and do everything you can to make this process efficient, because members of the community, members of council have said that we're a city in crisis now. We're facing emergency level situations. And in those times, I think we really need to think outside the box and get moving a little more quickly. And if we do that, I think you're going to see a lot more people in our community show up with ideas. And that's how we can really move this city forward. Thank you.
So if that's the case, and if we're saying that we are basically one, then what Amy said is, we had people get kidnapped from our community. If that's the way that we're looking at it, and if we're saying that we aren't going to cooperate with us, and if we don't believe in what they're doing, then they just came into our community and kidnapped our people. And then, I read the statement that city council released, and, it was like, if you need help, call SEMA or call Pisgah Legal Services, organizations that are doing great work.